All right. All right, we're holding today's daf base. We're holding Chaf Aleph from my base on the bottom, 4 lines from the bottom. We had mentioned in the Mishnah the various different dinim of Kriyas HaTorah as it pertains to different days. Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, v'cholu. And the Mishnah said, "Rosh Chodesh and b'Chodesh Lamayit, Karin Arba." You read 4 aliyahs on Rosh Chodesh and on Chol Lamayit. Ask the Gemara. Boy minei ula barav merava. Parshas Rosh Chodesh. Ketzad Karin. So how do we break up the parshiyos in the beginning of not the beginning in Pinchas that we use for laning Yonah the Yomi today? We just laned it. I'm sure everyone was paying attention. So basically the way it works is like this, just very simple, just for those that are the uninitiated. So when we refer to parshiyos, we don't mean like Parshas Shmos Ve'Revai, we mean the parshiyos in the Torah, the psuchim and the stumim, basically the spaces, the paragraphs basically in the Torah. And we generally speaking have 3 rules when it comes to Kriyas. There are really 4 rules, but for our Gemara we'll say 3 rules. There's these following 3 rules. Rule number 1 is there cannot be less than 3 psukim in an aliyah. And rule 2 and 3 are there to basically say, don't forget rule 1. That's pretty much the way it works. So rule 2 is, when you finish an aliyah, you can't finish with less than 3 psukim in a parsha. Left, with less than 3 psukim left in the parsha. And the reason is because the person is referred to as the Gzeres HaYotzin. The people who leave at that moment might think the next aliyah will only be whatever, 2 psukim. And that's a problem because we don't remember rule 1. We always have to have 3 psukim in an aliyah. And similarly, we don't start an aliyah within the first 3, meaning you can start from the first or the 4th, but we don't start from the 2nd or the 3rd, because if you start from the 2nd or the 3rd, the Gzeres HaNichnasin, who are only coming in at that point, might inaccurately conclude that the previous aliyah was only 1 or 2 psukim, and then again, that breaks rule 1. Yep, okay. So those are the 3 rules. So what we're going to see over here is we have by Rosh Chodesh, really the parshiyos of Rosh Chodesh, the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh is 5 psukim long. But before we discuss the Musafin of Rosh Chodesh, there are 2 other parshiyos that are slightly related to Rosh Chodesh. One is talking about Shabbos, that's 2 psukim long. And the one before that is referring to, I believe, the Talmud, which in general is going to have some days when Rosh Chodesh shows up. Now, the first parsha is 8 psukim, the second parsha is 2 psukim, and the third parsha, the parsha of Rosh Chodesh, is 5 psukim. So there's plenty of psukim to go around. The question is how to split it up without breaking rules 1, 2, and 3, right? So we can think about it outside. Theoretically speaking, you can go 3 and 3, but then you're leaving 2 in the first one because there's 8. You can go 4 and 4, but then how do you split the next 2? What are you going to do? You're going to read 2 of Shabbos. How many do you go into the next one? You want to go 1 in, you're stopping before the first 3. 2 in, still a problem. 3 in, okay, you solve that problem. Now you're only leaving over 2 psukim in that last one. So no matter which way you go, you end up breaking the rule. In fact, the last thing I just mentioned, you're breaking 2 rules. Number 1, you only have 2 psukim left. That means you're going to have an aliyah with only 2 psukim. That's the big one. You can't break rule number 1. So let's see it inside. So the Gemara is going to try to solve the problem. So Barosh Echatafan. Boy minei ulam barav merava. Parshas Rosh Chodesh Ketzad Koyrin Oisa. Tzavis b'nei Yisrael v'mata lemas korban ilachmi. That parsha. The first parsha is the Havyin Tmanya Psukis, 8 Psukim, Hechinavit, Nikri, Trey, Tlosa, Psukim. You're going to have Rishon and Sheni go 3 and 3. Pashalahu Trey, you have 2 left over. If you have 2 left over, that's a problem because Ve'im Shairin Parsha, Pachs Mishlosha Psukim. This is referred to as Zeres HaYotzin. We'll call that rule 2. Nikri, Arba, what are you going to do? Read 4 and 4, which is fine. You don't have a problem of leaving over 2. Then what are you going to do after that? Pashalahu Shiv, you have 7 left. 2 of B'yom Shabbos having Trey, and 5 of Rosh Chachechem having Chamisha. So what are you going to do there? Hechinavit, Nikri Trey Mehav Echad Mehanach. You can't do that either. As we go into Chav Beis Amar Aleph, Ein Maschilim beParsha Pachs Mishlosh Psukim. You don't start a parsha within the first 3 psukim unless it's the first pasuk, right? So Likri Trey Mehav et Plus Mehav. So what are you going to do? You're going to knock the 2 of Shabbos out, which is a parsha in and of itself, and then go 3 into the next parsha. Pasha Lahu Trey. You have 2 left, which has 2 problems. Number 1. You can't have an aliyah less than 3, and even if you somehow figured out a way to go beyond that pasuk into the next parsha, which is not an option that we shouldn't discuss, you have the separate problem of you're breaking rule 2, which is you're leaving less than 3 psukim in an aliyah. So the Gemara says that Rava responded by saying, Amar Loi Zulei Shamati. I don't have a good answer for you in terms of this halacha. However, I can reference you. I'm pointing you to another sugya that we learned in Tainus maybe, 2.5, 3 weeks ago. What does it say? says like this. Kiyotzi b'shamati, a similar case. What's the similar case that Tanan the Mishnah says in Tainis the following? So let's just have some context. There's something called the Maimid. The Ma'amados were a set of 24 groups of, we'll go simple, Yisraelim, and they were sort of like the associated Yisraelim connected the 24 Mishmaros of Kohanim. What were the Kohanim? The Kohanim were there to do the Avodah, and they would work 1 week at a time, generally speaking, twice a year. So too these Ma'amados, these Yisraelim would work twice a year, more or less. Now, some of these Ma'amados were in the Beis HaMikdash, standing over the Karbanos, Tzibur, the Talmud, and the Chulu, and they would do Smicha, and they would daven Hashem that the Karbanos should be niskabel. A separate group of these Yisraelim would live in their communities, go into shul, and set up shop in shul. What would they do that day? They'd fast. They would daven to Hashem, special tefillas, extra tefillas. The other thing they did was they'd lane. What would they lane? Well, since they were working 7 days, they'd split the laning up for the week by the 7 days of Sheshus Me'Breshus, right? So you'd have the first day they'd lane Sunday, second day they'd lane Monday, v'chulu, v'chulu. Now the problem is, as we know, we didn't mention, but from yesterday's Gemara, there's a fourth rule, which is you can't have really less than 10. But we're makel in certain scenarios, like on Purim, when we only lay 9 by Parsha Zachar, not Parsha Zachar, but the day of the Megilla laning on Purim, which is only 9 psukim in that Parsha. And also, on the first day of the Ma'amados, where you're laning the first Parsha, which is the Parsha of Bereishis, which has 5 psukim, and then you do the first day, the second day. On the second day, you do the second day and the third day. On the third day, you do the third day, the fourth day. So what ends up happening is you only have 8 psukim. You have the 5 psukim of Bereishis, and then you have the 3 psukim of Yehirakiah. So you're left with 8. So we have to somehow squeeze an extra pasuk out of that 8 psukim. How do we squeeze that 8 pasuk out, that 9th pasuk out? So Rava thinks to say that if I can figure out how we solve it there, then maybe somehow we'll be able to apply it back to here. We'll hold off on explaining how by us it works until we get to the end of the Gemara, because it doesn't get complicated, but I just want to make sure that we're keeping things separate. So the Gemara says, Kiyotzi bo shamati, the Tanan the Mishnah says, on the first day of the Ma'amados, Bereishis, V'yehirakiah, you have a problem that's 5 and 3. V'tani Allah Bereishis b'shnayim Yehirakiah be'echad, that we're supposed to lane Bereishis. The 5 psukim of Bereishis with 2 aliyahs. Well, how does that work, right? So Gemara says like this: V'havina b'bishlam Yehirakiah be'echad. That makes sense. That plus a psukim have it. 3 psukim. That works. Ela Bereishis b'shnayim chamisha psukim have it. Utnana kari b'tayr leifich mishlosh psukim. That was rule number 1. V'itmar Allah. And over there we saw machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Rav amar doilig, Shmuel amar paisik. Rav says doilig. Let's just say it outside. Rav says Rav amar doilig. Before you read the Gemara's question, doilig means you read 1, 2, and 3, and then you read 3, 4, and 5. Right? So really, doilig here doesn't mean skip. Doilig means you go back a minute and repeat the last pasuk of the first one. So how do you get 6 psukim out of the first 5 psukim? You read 3 twice. Now, Rav inherently creates problems with 2 and 3, rules 2 and 3, because by reading 1, 2, and 3, you're leaving only 2 psukim in the first parsha. And then by the second aliyah starting at 3, you're also starting too early in the parsha because there's 2 psukim before that. So therefore, Rav is clearly not concerned with rules 2 and 3, at least in this scenario. Shmuel Amar Paisik, what does he say? Shmuel says, no, that's not what you do. You go 1, 2, and then you use the asnachta in the middle of the third pasuk, and use that almost as like a temporary sof pasuk. So basically, you turn Aleph and Beis into 2 psukim, and then Gimel gets split into 2 psukim. So it's Aleph, Beis, first half of Gimel, second half of Gimel, Dal and Hey. You get 6 psukim out of 5, and then Shlishi reads the last Yehirakiah 3 times. So Shmuel and Rav have a machlekes. The Gemara is now going to spend till basically the wide lines explaining their 2 shitas. And then when we're done explaining their shitas, the Gemara is going to perhaps come back to explain maybe what the halach is by Rosh Chodesh.
The Gemara did thanks to that also, right?
Didn't talk about Rosh Chodesh, but yeah, this next chapter we're turning Gemara. Some minor adjustments, but basically the same. V'itmarala Rav Amadurlig Shmuel Amadurlig Rav Amadurlig my time Amadurlig Rav. Why didn't you learn like Shmuel and say that you split it? He says because when Moshe Rabbeinu sat on Har Sinai and Hashem gave him the Torah, Hashem said to him, "B'Messiah, this is where the pasuk ends. And if Moshe is ending psukim where he's supposed to end it, we're not supposed to go be mechadish new ending of psukim without Moshe." And that's meduyik to lashon called psukim delay paski Moshe unlay paskin alay. There's a lot you can talk about over here about how come we do a ton of splitting of psukim. But Yomi Mashishi is a half a pasuk. There's a lot of times in general where we start and stop psukim in the shaloi, seemingly not kifi this din. Although some explain that this din is specifically referring to you can't end the pasuk early, but you can always start a pasuk in the middle, which answers like 95% of these kashas that people bring up. But there are still some examples where it's a problem. Yahalelu Hashem Hashem when we bring the Torah back is an issue. But either way, okay. So Rav says since I have a problem with Kol Psuka D'Lei Paskin Moshe Anan Lei Paskinan, therefore I don't like Shmuel's suggestion. So, okay, but let's break. What am I supposed to do? I'm going to repeat the third pasuk, even if it means breaking rules 2 and 3 about Nichnas and V'yotzei. Shmuel Amar Paskinan Lei. Shmuel says, no problem, we're going to split it up. The Hamar Reb Chananya Kara. Reb Chananya Kara was a big bucky in Kriya, and he taught that he had the following statement. Tsar Gadol Hayali Eitzel Rabbi Chanina Hagadol. Who was Rabbi Chanina Hagadol? Rabbi Chanina Hagadol was the Rebbe of Rabbi Yochanan, and he himself was a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So he is like a quasi Tana, yeah, almost like even maybe bigger than Rav. Meaning, the Gemara assumes that this question is going to be a kasha on Shmuel. That Shmuel would never be chaylik on Rabbi Chanina Hagadol the same way he would never be chaylik on a Tana, which is very interesting. Rav's a Tana; he's a Tana Upolik. Shmuel has no problem arguing with Rav. But Shmuel won't argue with Chanina Hagadol, so in a certain sense, Chanina Hagadol could very well be even a higher madrega than Rav, just at least in terms of what Shmuel was willing to argue with. And we'll see on the Gemara Amid Beis the way Rav and Shmuel treated each other with respect. But either way, Tsar Gadol Hayali Eitzel Rabbi Chanina Hagadol. What was the Tsar? V'lo hitterli lifsek elo l'tina k'sholis Rav. Meaning, I'm a Balkairei. I'm someone who's teaching Kriya. I'm teaching boys exactly how to learn Chumash. And I was begging him, let me please teach it to them in a way that allows me to split the psukim up. And he says, fine, you can. However, hoyol will hislamet asuyan. It's only when you have such a very, very important heter. But generally speaking, we're very makbet to not split up sukkim. And this is a kasha on Shmuel. Shmuel, how are you just willy-nilly over here, just going and splitting up a pasuk just to sort of solve this problem with the Malmodas? So the more answers, what do you mean? Hasam time mai mishum delayafshu. You're telling me over there you got to teach the boys how to read the psukim, right? And in order to do that properly, I got to split the pasuk up, because if I don't do that, they're not going to understand what's going on. So hachanami lo yafsher, meaning to say, I don't like Rav's solution of repeating a pasuk. Why? Why does Shmuel not like the suggestion of Rav? That's the Gemara. Ushmuel amar pasuk, my time at the loyam akdayla. You have an alternative. You're running and paskening up psukim where you shouldn't be doing it. You have an alternative. Go like Rav. So he says no. Zer mishum enichnasin umishum hayotzin. Meaning, really what the Gemara is basically saying is as follows. Rav and Shmuel are both in a conundrum. They're trying to solve a problem. How do I squeeze an extra pasuk out of 8 psukim? So one says you repeat, one says you split. Each one of them acknowledges I'm taking some sort of leniency in an area of halacha. The difference is Rav says, I don't want to mess around with splitting up a pasuk. Shmuel says, I don't want to mess around with people walking out of shul or coming into shul late, and they might conclude inaccurately that you are allowed to have an aliyah with less than 3 psukim. Don't ask me why one holds one's more important than the other. Bottom line is that's their machlekes. So far, we still don't really have an answer for Rosh Chodesh, which is where we started from. So let's continue a little bit.
On the surface, splitting a pasuk seems worse because it's neged the Mesorah. Like, kol pasuk shel paske Moshe Rabbeinu anan lo paskinan. So you're violating the Mesorah.
Meaning it's almost like a Torah Shabbat Peh thing. Meaning it's almost as if to say, right.
The other one.
Right. So I was trying to understand exactly what exactly is this idea that you can't have an aliyah less than 3. Meaning, okay, I understand that Chazal were metakin that you have to have an aliyah of only 3. There's a Mishnah later on that says it. It's Dina de Mishnah that you can't have an aliyah less than 3. But why? So that's already not so clear. The Rishonim speak out a little bit. They say that it's like the Chachamim. I think the Levush says this. They're Mishayir that 3 psukim is considered a davar chashuv.
For sure.
Right. Meaning, Gemara says later on, maybe it's keneged, similar to the way we asked about why there's 3 aliyahs, maybe 3 psukim is keneged, Kohen Levi Yisrael, or it's keneged different other things. But the point is, you're right. I mean, it seems a chaymer to that. You have to sort of work that out. Well, and there's a svara to it also, as we'll see in the Gemara. The Gemara is about to ask a question. Meisvei on, there's different ways in the Rishonim here. We're going to go simple, go with Rashi. And we'll change the gears a little bit with Rashi. Meisvei. Rav and Shmuel both say a solution to when you have 8 psukim is you take the 5 pasuk parsha and you turn it into 6. Rav says by repeat. Shmuel says by splitting the middle pasuk. Meisvei, I have a brisa. Brisa says the following: Parsha shel shisha psukim. Let's say you have a parsha that's 6 psukim. Kairin. No problem. 2 aliyahs fits wonderful. Shalom Yisrael. V'shel chamisha psukim biyachid. Ideally, one should read, if you can, have one person read the whole 5 pasuk parsha. Try not to split it at all, because you run into problems when you split it. And obviously, the reason why is because of the Gzeras and Ichnasin and the Gzeras Hayotzim, which we discussed. However, b'di eved, what happened if Kara Rishon Shlosh? Let's say someone took that 5 pasuk parsha and only read 3. He read the aliyah, made the bracha before anyone had a chance to tell him to continue reading, got up, left, and he's gone. And now we're stuck. We got to finish, and we're stuck in the middle. What should you do now? Right?
Seems like they made their own decisions about when.
Well, we're going to see that the way Kriyas HaTorah, I mean, we already saw it a little bit yesterday. Right. The minig was, at first, everyone made a bracha only in the beginning, and then we made a bracha at the end, and then we switched it. So we'll see that there clearly was different minhagim in Kriyas HaTorah. I mean, even the idea of how we're Kriyas HaTorah week to week, Eretz Yisrael, versus Chutz La'aretz and how that changed over time and exactly when the double Parshias were set in.
That's why we have so little agreement about when the Haftorah ends, because originally you would end whenever, you'd start.
Whenever the idea stopped,
whenever,
yeah.
just different communities end at different spaces.
Yeah, it's a big sugi of minig. Yeah, 100%. So either way, what's the b'diavad in the brayso? So kara rishon shloisha, hasheni kara shnai mi parsha zu, ve'echad mi parsha acheres. The Tanakama holds that the second aliyah starts with those two and goes one pasuk into the next parsha.
Whoa.
So that's an aliyah of 3. Now this shita clearly is not concerned for what's referred to as the gzeros hanichnasim, right? Because we're only discussing the b'diavad here. He clearly doesn't hold the gzeros hanichnasim. He's not concerned ending a pasuk, one pasuk into the next parsha, that the next guy coming in is going to think, oh, the guy before me only read one. He's not concerned for that, and we'll see why. However, the Yesh Oimrim says there is a problem of the gzeros hanichnasim. He suggests, therefore, if you're going to go into the next parsha, read at least three psukim in v'yesh Oimrim shleisha. Okay, but benkach ubenkach, what's the issue? You see over here that no matter which sheet of Tanaim you go here, they did not repeat the pasuk. I mean, there would have been a simple solution according to Rav. Why not go to the third pasuk, start from there, and read 3, 4, and 5, and just halt? You don't run into anything about going into the next parsha. That's the Gemara's question. Sorry, I cut it off a little too early. Why does the shita hold that you go 3? Fine. V'imisa, like Rav, lemanda amar doileg nidloig, and the Rashi takes out the next line because really it's not a kash on Shmuel. Shmuel's whole svara is you're supposed to split the pasuk. Well, you don't gain anything by splitting the pasuk here because you're still repeating and splitting, right? What did we say? We're in a b'diavad situation. A guy read 3 psukim. So what's the suggestion now? Go back, reread half of 3? That doesn't do anything. We already read 3. That's repeating and splitting. There's no benefit to Rishonim speak out. So that's how Rashi sort of takes the gears out of here. Although other Rishonim, they find a way to answer the question because they explain that it's not going on the second half. It's actually going on the lechatchila. Meaning, what do you mean lechatchila? Take 5 psukim and just and read it all in one shot. Why not lechatchila do it, Rav and Shmuel? Which is a very difficult question because Rav and Shmuel themselves were only suggesting something in a b'diavad situation. And this is not the place really to sort of work it through, but you can understand why Rashi takes the gears out. So, okay, so what's the question? Rav, according to you, just go ahead and repeat the pasuk. What do you mean running into the next? Meaning benkach or benkach. Whether you hold like the Tanakama or you hold like the Yesh Oimrim, better to just go ahead and repeat 3. You don't run into the issue. So Rav answers what I think anyone here would answer was Shani Hasam de Efshabach. What do you mean? What's talking about over there is a general rule about Kriyas HaTorah. You're holding, chveis in the middle of Svayera somewhere, and for whatever reason, you found yourself holding by a 5 pasuk parsha, and now the guy walked out instead of reading the whole thing. Choice. So you have no choice. You run into the next parsha. You could be moist with a couple of psukim. But what are we talking about by the ma'amados? There were 8 psukim. The first day was 5. The second day was 3. We're not running into the third day's psukim. We only have 8 psukim to work with. So what are you supposed to do? You got to split 5 psukim up some way. So I have to come up with my way. Rav says I hold you repeat. Shmuel says I hold you split. But benkach ubenkach they find their solution, and there's going to be no kasha from this price. So continues the Gemara, Abrab Tanchum, Abrab Shum and Levi. Halacha, ki Yesh Oimrim. The halacha is like the Yesh Oimrim, who hold of the Gzeros HaNichnasim. Meaning the Machlekes HaTanoim here is, do we even have a Gzeros HaNichnasim? Meaning, are there 3 rules or only 2 rules? And the Tanakama says there is no concern of Gzeros HaNichnasim. We don't care when you start a parsha. We only care when you end the parsha, it seems. The Amr B'Tanchum, Amr B'Shum and Levi, not only is the halacha like the Yesh Oimrim that we do hold of Gzeros and Nichnasin, he says the halacha is also true. Kashem shein maschilin b'parsha pachim migim psukim, kachein mishayrin b'parsha pachim mishlosh psukim. Meaning rule number 2, the Gzeros hayotzin. For the Gemara Pshita, 1 second. If you're telling me that where there is a machlokes by Nichnasin, you tell me the halacha is like the machmir, then when they're both maskim, isn't it certainly the case? You really need to tell that to me? Pshita for the Gemara. Hashtu ma'as chalta the kamekel tanakama, machmira Yesh Oimrim. You're telling me the halacha is like the Yesh Oimrim. Then shiur the machmir tanakama, where even the tanakama will be maskim. That again, the assumption is that he's machmir, like him, right? Loy kosh kol shekin the machmira Yesh Oimrim. Meaning everyone would agree. Meaning the Gemara at this point is assuming that the gzeros hayotzin is much more likely to be held than the gzeros hanichnasim. So the Gemara is going to have to explain why that is, but the Gemara is just pointing out a fact. Why would you need to tell me both ilchases? Just tell me the less obvious one, and I'll know the obvious one. The Gemara says no. There's an argument to be made that even though the Tanakama is mekel by gzeros and nichnasin, he's machmir. So other way around, he's machmir by the gzeros hayotzin. Right. So that's the Gemara says.
They were worried about it.
So mahu the tema nichnasin shchichi, and therefore it's makes sense that one would have a concern that someone is going to show up late. However, yoitzin leishchichi, people leaving in the middle of laning, obviously they never davened in some places I've been to. The manchi sefer Torah v'nafki chas v'shalom, and therefore I might think that maybe Gzeras HaYotzin isn't even something we're concerned for. Not that it isn't an issue, it's just that it's not happening, or it's not happening with enough frequency that there's a reason to make a takana. So I need to teach you that halacha is true there as well. So kamash malan, meaning it'll come out lefi both statements that we really hold of both rules. We hold of Gzeras HaNichnasin and we hold of Gzeras HaYotzin, and he's, it seems, talking about in general, not talking about a specific case of Ma'amados or a specific case somewhere else. It's a general rule. We have a concern for Gzeras HaNichnasin and Gzeras HaYotzin. However, there is a shita in the Tanai. Meaning, if you would coming out now, if I were to ask Rav, is there an argument to be made? I mean, because again, going back to the machlekes Rav and Shmuel, Rav says, by the Ma'amados, you repeat. Shmuel says, no, you can't do that. You have the Gzeras HaNichnasin and Gzeras HaYotzin. Well, now the Gemara is explaining to us, well, there's at least one reason to say, maybe we shouldn't have a Gzeras HaYotzin. Gzeras HaYotzin already I can get rid of. Why? Because Gzeras HaYotzin is l'shchichi. Maybe Rav holds that, okay, there is such a Gzera, but if you're telling me I have to choose between splitting a pasuk versus repeating a pasuk, I'm going to choose repeating, because already to begin with, the Gzeras HaYotzin is not so stark because it's l'shchiach. The Gemara continues with Tanakama Maishna Shiur Delay. We're saying now that the Tanakama holds that he's makbid on the Gzeras HaYotzin. Why is that? Mishum Yotzin, right? So then he asked them, Aschuli nami Gzera Mishum Nechnasin. Why are you mechalek that the Gzeras HaYotzin you're machmir, but the Gzeras HaNichnasin you're not? Meaning, if the concern is people are going to conclude that we don't have an aliyah of 3, well, what's the difference of the concluding it from what happened before versus what's going to happen after they leave?
Especially now that we know that Niflasim is more common.
Exactly.
Exactly.
100%. So the Gemara says, Amri manda ayil shiuli shaili. He says, because there's a different concern. I mean, not different concern, there's a different solution. And there's a shtickle raya you can talk during davening, or at least ben aprokim for sure. For sure, ben aprokim, you have a raya, you're allowed to talk during laning. So I don't want to hear any from the people over here telling me you're not allowed to say shalom aleichem to someone on Shabbos, yeah? So what does it say over here? He says, no, it's no different. Someone's going to run out of shul. I'm nervous. Maybe who's he going to talk to? He's going to think, yeah, you know those bums over there in the shul, they only lane two psukim. Must be, that's the halacha. Maybe next time I go lane, I'm going to lane only 2 psukim in an aliyah. But the people in shul, he's going to come in late. He's going to see that they're starting from pasuk gimel. He's going to think in his head, what did they do? They must have laned the previous aliyah only 1 2 psukim. So he's going to knock on the rabbi's table and he say, Rabbi, what? And the rabbi says, no. What are you talking about? The first 2 psukim came from the previous aliyah, and he's going to find out the solution.
That's the thought of the people who come later.
Yeah, exactly right. But so you see, so on the one, so what is the Gemara pointing out? The Gemara is pointing out here, I think, a little bit of a hesber as to why the halach should be like Rav by the Ma'amados. What is Rav saying? Rav saying, I'm going to repeat a pasuk. Shmuel says, Gzeras HaNichnasin, Gzeras HaYotzin. Rav says, Gzeras HaNichnasin. There's no concern for Gzeras HaNichnasin. Why? Because they can always ask the guy sitting next to them. Gzeras HaYotzin, there's no concern because it's a milsa l'shchicha. Not that in general I don't hold of it, but if I'm talking about pushing off one of the Gzeras here, I can knock them both off. But Psukkah Dele Paske Moshe, we're going to go ahead and that you can't do. Either way. So Shalach Le Rabba Brei the Rabba Rav Yosef Hilchas Hamai. This question here is very vague. What does it mean? Are we asking about Rosh Chodesh, which we haven't even answered yet, or are we asking about the Ma'amados? So the Rashi learns it's going by the Ma'amados. Other Rishonim hold it's going by Rosh Chodesh. And depending upon which way you go, it'll come out a different halacha.
So you're saying, who do we pass in like between Rav and Shmuel, and then wherever it's applied?
So that's the way Rashi learned. Ramban learns a different way, but okay, fine. So the way you read this Gemara, pretty simple, is we pass like Rav, you repeat the pasuk. That's by the Ma'amados. The Emsoi Dolgon here is a little bit funny if you learn like this. What do you mean, I'm sorry? There's where else would you do it? Meaning the first aliyah goes 3, but he can't repeat a pasuk. So we're going to say Shlishi is going to repeat a pasuk. So the person who's reading Yehi Rakia, what's he repeating? So it's a little bit difficult with that. Pshat, there's a mahalach through it.
Let's say it was Rosh Chodesh. Would then say Dolgan make sense? Because we're also
not perfect, but it makes a little bit. It does make a little bit more sense. Okay, I'll just tell you what the Rishonim speak on very quickly, just so we have an understanding. If you're paying attention by laning, what we do, and I think this is true, Ashkenazim, Sfarad, no different. I'm pretty sure. Is what?
It's like Rishon Sheni as well.
No, I'm talking about by Rosh Chodesh, meaning when you have 4 aliyahs, how do we split it up? So our minig is like the Rif says, and like Rashi says, you read the first 3, and then the second aliyah repeats the third pasuk and goes 3, 4, 5, which leaves 3 psukim, and Shlishi reads those 3 and the next 2, which knocks out the third parsha, which is a 2 pasuk parsha, and then Revi just reads the last 5. That's how we do it. And when I say we, I mean that's the minhag ha'olam nowadays. There is the sheet of the Vilna Gaon, which is like he has a very interesting svara. But before I tell you, the Ramban asks a question on this mahalach. What's the whole? I mean, this is how do you explain the Gemara? The Gemara is saying Rosh Chodesh, what's the halacha? The Gemara brings this whole story with Rav and Shmuel, and ostensibly the Gemara means to say if we pass like Rav, do what Rav says. Rav says you repeat one of the psukim. So it must be by Rosh Chodesh we do the same thing, like I just explained. 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? That's how the Gemara is suggesting it. So the question is, Ramban asks, what was the whole reason we had to come on to this funny teretz? The Gemara said, well, you can't go 3 and 3 and then leave over 2 because the Gzeres Yotzin. You can't go 4 and 4 and then how you did do the 2 and the 5. There's a Gzeres HaNichnasin. So Elamai will go like Rav. Okay, and what did we accomplish? So what are we suggesting? You start 1, 2, 3, and you're stopping at 3, leaving 2 psukim over. That's a problem of Gzeres HaYotzin. What are you starting at 3 and then going 3, 4, 5 for Sheni? That's a problem of the Gzeres HaNichnasin. You haven't solved anything. The suggestion is to do what the Rif suggests, Rashi suggests, the way the Gemara is answering, and the Gemara hasn't solved anything. So the Ramban, I mean, to me, it's like a bomb kasha. It's like, how do you read the Gemara? The Gemara's bothered, Gzeres HaNichnasin, Gzeres HaYotzin, and then it makes a suggestion to do like Rav, which is a Gzeres HaNichnasin, Gzeres HaYotzin.
It may not apply to a 2 pasuk parsha. In other words, people will say, "Oh, there's a 2 pasuk."
No, but that's not the problem here. The problem is that even on Rosh Chodesh, the first parsha, which is 8 psukim, right? You're going to go 1, 2, 3, right? And then you're going to start the next aliyah at 3, which means you're starting within the first 3 psukim of the first one, right? So that's the Gzeres HaNichnasin, right? So you have the same problem there. You're going to anyways have. So the Ramban suggests, what are you contorting yourself into repeating and only to be left with the same problem you would have had? Just go ahead and do. If we're going to have the problem, just let's not mess up the Seder HaPsukim. So he suggests to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then meaning leaving over 2. Have the next guy go 1, 2, 1, 2, and then the last one goes 5. That's the Ramban. So we don't pass like that. The Vilna Gaon suggests a way to solve the problem without having a Gzeres HaNichnasin or a Gzeres HaYotzin, and only those who are makbid on the minute. How does he say? You go 1, 2, 3, right, which leaves off plenty of psukim. And then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And then he says the person who goes shlishi goes back 3 psukim into the first parsha, reads the last 3 and the next 2, and then the last aliyah gets the last 5. No one's repeating. Meaning he understands that's pshat in the Gemara, and that's the only way you solve which would be the best way to do it. The kasha that they ask is that it comes out, we don't have a makar in the Gemara for someone saying you can repeat more than 1 pasuk. Rav says you can read 1 pasuk. Who says you can repeat 3 psukim? So that's where they thing on the gun.
I have an ultra simplified approach.
Meaning
the whole thing 4 times.
So the Rishonim asking that also. The Rishonim ask, why not just repeat it multiple times?
Yeah.
You can ask this, and they say if the second aliyah or the third aliyah isn't adding anything onto the second or the first, it's kilo. It's not called an aliyah. There has to be a hisaf of some type. But okay, either way, that's the Gemara. Continue the Gemara back. Okay, zehaklal kol sheish by musaf. We said in the Mishnah, we're trying to figure out how many aliyahs things get. So we said that if it has a musaf, which meant, let's say, Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, it gets 4 aliyahs. Iboyelu tainas tibur bekama, meaning it doesn't mention a tainas tibur. It's the one day in the Mishnah that's not discussed. So what's the halacha? Rosh Chodesh and Moed Ika carbon musaf arba, aval hachad leka carbon musaf loy. Do we say that since there's no carbon musaf, it doesn't get it, and it only gets 3 aliyahs? Or Dilma, maybe we'll say that hachanami by tainas tibur Ika musaf tefillah, meaning even though there's no musaf carbon and therefore the tefillah's musaf isn't there, but there is an additional tefillah, the tefillah vanenu. So in which case, then maybe it should have 4 aliyahs. Tashma b'rosh chadashim v'chaylusham. So we want to bring a raya from our Mishnah. What does it say in our Mishnah? B'rosh chadashim v'chaylusham loyd koyin arba. What do you see? There's a diak that stopped get them for habatayna stibur gimel. Gemara says, what do you mean? Emaresha b'sheni uvechamishi uv'shabbos b'mincha koyin gimel hatayna stibur arba. So since there's a diak ben kach uben kach, the Gemara says elamachalek elamash mina. So I don't have a raya from the Mishnah. The Gemara says, okay, no raya from a Mishnah. I'll bring a raya from a Maisa. What's the Maisa? Tashma. And this Maisa is going to take us to the end of the daf. The Rav Ikul Bavel Batanas Tibur. Rav went to Bavel, meaning Bavel isn't just the Bavel capital, the country of Bavel, but there's a city in Bavel, right? So different cities. There was a city called Bavel inside Bavel. Think of it like New York City inside New York State, let's say. Yeah. So he went there on a Tainas Tibur. Kam Kara B'Sifra, and he got up to lane. Pasach Brich, when he started laning, he made Asher Bacha Bana Mikolo Amim. Chasim v'loy brich, but when he finished, he didn't say Hashanas on a teres emes. He didn't say the second bracha. Now remember, the Mishnah told us that, at least in the times of the Mishnah, the way they did it was, you didn't make a before and after for each aliyah. The kohen would say the bracha Asher Bacha Banu. They'd finish the laning, and whoever was the last person laning would say Hashanas on a teres emes. We saw in the Gemara yesterday that they made a takana that because of the Gzeres HaNichnasin and the Gzeres HaYotzin, they decided to make every aliyah go before and after. But Rav, we're assuming in the Gemara here, is going before the change of that takana, which makes sense. It was very early. Amoira could very well be that he still did that. So it says over here that when he started laning, he made Asher B'Chabanu. However, when he finished, he did not say Asher Nasan SMS. Not only that, Nofal Kuli Alma An Payu, everyone did Tachnun, but Rav Le Nofal Alapi, but Rav didn't. So Michti, the Gemara is trying to understand from the Maisa over here exactly what happened. Rav B'Yisrael Kara, obviously we know Rav's not a Kohen or a Levi. Since we know he's not a Kohen or a Levi, must be he got Shlishi. My time Chasam V'Lei Baruch. So then why, if he got Shlishi, did he not say the Baruch at the end? Elamai, must be he wasn't the final Aliyah. It must be there was someone coming after him, meaning it must be on a Tainus Sibra we have 4 Aliyahs, not 3.
And they're ignoring the fact that he shouldn't have made the bracha at the start either.
So the Gemara's about to, Gemara's address.
Like lighting that.
Gemara's pretending it's looking blind-eyed at that. Lav mishum the boy lemikri achrina basrei. Isn't it because it's the 4th aliyah coming, and therefore he didn't make the bracha yet because the next guy's going to make the bracha, and also the Gemara is obviously not assuming that they would give Rav Revi, right? Meaning who says, right? Meaning he didn't make a bracha at the end. Must be he got shlishi. What? Maybe he got Revi. I mean, if you're already ignoring, either way, like Rav Kahani Kra. Oh. Zok the Gemara, even though Rav was not a Kohen, he did get the first Aliyah. What do you mean? Was there no Kohanim there? Is that why he got it? So the Gemara says no. Meaning the minig by Rav Huna was such a big Talmud Chacham, he was the Gadol Adar, that when he was in shul, they would be mechabed him, even if there were Kohanim in the Beis Medrash, even in the shul, they would give Rav Huna Kohen, even though he wasn't a Kohen. So too they gave it to Rav, and therefore there's no raya from the story. Maybe the reason why he didn't end it was because he got the first Aliyah. So that makes sense. He made the first bracha because he was the first one to get an aliyah, and he didn't make the end bracha because he wasn't at the end. The Gemara says, "Bishlam Rav Huna Kari bekahani the ha'afila Rav Ami v'Rav Asi to kahani chshiva da'ar Yisrael make of kaifel leila Rav Huna." It makes sense to say that Rav Huna was the one who was called up as a kohen, even though he wasn't a kohen, meaning that because of the chshivas of how much Torah he knew. That makes sense because even the chashav kohanim in his time would bow to him and prostrate themselves and acknowledge that he was their greatest Talmud Chacham. So it makes sense to say that there was a kilo, like a mechilas kavod from the kohanim in general to this person. However, that only works if the person who is getting called up for kohen has this maila of being respected by everyone in his generation. Elav ha'ika Shmuel himself, the kahana havi, who was an actual kohen, u'vedibar alei, and Shmuel was given more kavod than Rav. Meaning the story talks about references to Gemara and Gittin, where Rav would always let Shmuel walk in the Beis Medrash before him. So you see, even Rav himself showed him that kavod. Right? So the Gemara says no. Shmuel nami mechav chayiv leila Rav. Really, Batsim Shmuel understood that he was not on the madrega of Rav. He was chaylik with him, but he understood in the end of the day that Rav was really the Gadol Adar. And that story you're referring to where Rav would let Shmuel go in, the Rav who the Ovid like covered, it was Rav sort of being makel in his covet to show that to Shmuel. But Be'etzim, even Shmuel understood that Rav was the Gadol Adar, and therefore you could Lo'ilam say that Rav was the one who got Kayan, not because he's an actual Kayan, but because he was the Chashav in the Dar, and therefore he got the first bracha and he didn't make the last bracha.
Rav was older than Shmuel, is that our understanding?
I think so. Okay. I think Rav was, I think
but not like a Rebbe, like more contemporary.
Talmud Chaver, and when Rav would do it, we'd only do it when Shmuel was there. But when he wasn't there, Shmuel, who's not sitting in the shul there, Rav is now getting called up to Kayin. It's no problem. Go ahead. It's fine. That the Rav Kahani Kara. What's the raya that Rav got called up for Rishon? Because if you're going to tell me at the end, this is your question. My time of Baruch. Why did he make a bracha at the beginning? Elamai, what are you going to tell me? It's going after the time of the Takana. Lachat Takana. That they already made this takana. So then why don't he say a bracha at the end? So the Gemara is trying to figure it out. So the Gemara shani heichadi yosef Rav the ma'ayil aili meifik leinafik now meifik leinafki. Meaning, what was the whole reason why the takana was made? Was it because the concern was the gzeras anichnasim v'hayoytz? Someone's going to walk in and not hear a bracha after the aliyah. Will think that they never make. Won't hear a bracha before the aliyah. Will think they just don't make brachas before an aliyah. And the person who's leaving will think that maybe we don't make a bracha at the end. So therefore, each aliyah had one before and one after. So the whole concern is, will people leave or will people show up late? So people showing up late, no one has any control over. So therefore, we would always make the bracha before each aliyah. So Rav, who got Yisrael, made a bracha asher bracha banu. Why didn't Rav make the bracha after? Because even Rav knew when Rav's in shul, no one's leaving.
And usually you say low plug on Xavier. You don't say, well, it doesn't apply here or there. Maybe early on, I was just going to say, So it could be low plug is something that, and again, this is off the top of my bike. I have no clue if this is Emes or not, but it could be that low plug is something that it's possible that every takana would have a din of low plug right away. It's just that until
the Hamoin Am and it's nispazer throughout the nation,
Right.
you sort of have to gauge, right? Because there's a musig of a gzera that a tzibur she'eni yochel lamaba is not, it doesn't take, right? So you have to sort of know exactly how that works, but you couldn't make the argument that it just didn't get, until it really became sort of understood, legislative, official. It's very possible that it was.
Before then, it's more the reason of the gzera is applied by people,
and you'll have to assume. I would have to assume then that the gzera was made. I mean, obviously significant. It must have just been when it happened, because in the times of the Mishnah, Rav Yehuda Nasi wouldn't have even. I mean, Rav Yehuda Nasi didn't even mention it in the Mishnah, right? It was only a takon of later, and Rav was only 50 to 100 years after, not even really, right? I mean, it was very close to the time of the Chsimas HaMishnah. So you have to sort of work that out. And also the question you'd have to ask on that would be, would it really be the minhag of a Gadol Hadar who must have been involved, or at least certainly a Talmud of the ones who were involved in creating the takana, that he would, on his own, decide to say no? I mean, maybe the argument's the opposite. People would say, "Oh, that's Rob. It's different." Very, very difficult.
Is there discussion of this?
I don't know. I didn't see. I don't know. Okay, so the Gemara is pointing out. Okay, fine. So that was the mice with Rob, at least as it pertains to Tainus Sibra. So the Gemara is saying, "La'olam, you're right. You could say he got Kayin, and therefore there's no raya, or he could have got Yisrael, in which case there is a raya to what's the din by a tiny sibra. But since you can go either way, there's no raya from the Maisa. We'll come back to this Maisa later, Benegay the Tachnan, and prostrating oneself on the ground. Tashma, Brisa says, Zeh klal kol sheyesh bo bittul malacha la'am. Any day that has bittul malacha, meaning that by extending davening, you're going to make people miss work. On those days, kigoyin tainis tzibur v'tisha b'av, kairin gimel. Meaning any day where there's no iser malacha, we do not have an extra aliyah. We go 3 aliyahs, and then you get people out because of the tircha tzibura. However, v'she'ein boy bittul malacha la'am, when it has no bittul malacha, meaning where even if they were to stick around a little bit longer, they're not running off to work. Kigoyin roshi chadashim v'chaylu shel mayid kairin dalet. Shema mina, the Gemara brings a raya from here that it must be tainis tzibur 3. Now, what does it mean when it says over here that this bittul malacha b'Rosh Chodesh? So bittul malacha b'Rosh Chodesh b'pashtus is not referring to the iser malacha. There is no iser malacha in Rosh Chodesh. So Rashi over here brings from a Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer, famous Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer, that the women have a minig to not work on Rosh Chodesh, which is a little bit difficult to the Gemara. What exactly does that mean? Why can the men not stick around an extra couple of minutes because their wives aren't working? Elamai, what? They need to help out at home. It's not so simple. I mean, they're going off to work. So why not say that there should only be 3 aliyahs? So the Rishonim over here, they struggle with it. There's no good, I don't think, a really good hesber. Some Rishonim.
Well, it seems like once the women started doing this, many men may also.
So you could say that.
Like they're embarrassed. What? Our wives are
being makbid. Especially when you realize that the Pirkei Rebbe is referring to the fact that women were given Rosh Chodesh seemingly as a schar for the fact that they didn't voluntarily give their golds and for the Chet HaEgel, which is also a little bit difficult to understand. So there's a shita of the Ritva here, Rabbi Yonasan Milunil also, who says that no. He says that based on a pasuk in Shmuel, it refers to Erev Rosh Chodesh as a Yoim. I forget the exact pasuk, but it refers to Erev Rosh Chodesh as a day of Melacha. The implication being that Rosh Chodesh itself is not a day of Melacha, and they want to bring a right from there that it could be at a certain time there was a minhag even by the men to not work at all, and therefore it could be the minhag of 4 aliyahs. It was established during that time, and then when that minhag of not working stopped for whatever reason, which again maybe wasn't the minhag of halacha, but it was just the way people were noyeg on Rosh Chodesh, the minhag of having 4 aliyahs stayed, and the other minhag sort of dissipated. Right. Once we had 4, we're not going to take it away. Right. That's one mahalach in the Rishonim. I think there's a similar shita the Mordechai brings from the Ri. I think if I remember the way, I didn't see it inside. I just saw it quoted. Mm-hmm. He also says something similar based on the pasuk in Shmuel that Rosh Chodesh there was an Isser Melacha, but the way he understands it is slightly different. That the Isser Melacha might even remain today, and all it means is that the Isser Melacha for men is what we'd refer to as like hard labor, meaning lifting heavy things, farm work. That is an Isser in Rosh Chodesh. But what we'll refer to as like lighter melachos, like writing, ksiva, mechika. Basically anything that's part of the Siddur Depas, you'd probably be okay. The later part of the Siddur Depas. So he understands it that way, in which case then it would make sense that people weren't going to work necessarily, and so therefore And then there's one other sheet, which is the sheet of the Turi Evan, which I find to be the most enjoyable to think about, but it's sort of a little bit difficult in Pshat, which is he says that really the Pirkei D'Elazar, which says that women were given Rosh Chodesh, while true, isn't the reason as to why what the Gemara means here when it says the Bittul Malach and Rosh Chodesh. Bittul Malach and Rosh Chodesh referring to men. And he says it has something to do with the fact that during the times that the Beis HaMikdash was Kayim, we'd be bringing Karbanis Tzibur. Specifically, on Rosh Chodesh, we would have a carbon musaf. That carbon musaf was a communal tzibur, and we know that at least when a person is bringing a personal carbon, on the day a person brings a personal carbon, it's like a yantiv for him, and he's asur malach on that day, which is true. That is true. Personal carbon I bring, I'm asur malach on that day. I treat it like a yantiv. So he says that since the musaf is like a carbon tzibur, like we would have personally, so Klal Yisrael and Rosh Chodesh during the Zman of the Beis HaMikdash had an Isser Malacha. And that would apply even to men, in which case then, now the Shiloh, there's many Shilohs on this, so then how come there's not 5 Aliyahs, 6 Aliyahs? Why don't we have more? Why don't we treat it like Yontif? Make it a 5 Aliyah day. That's question number one they ask. The second question they ask on him is, the carbon Talmud is brought every day. That's a carbon seaver. You don't find this in they ask him. There's a lumdus there that's Gishmak, and he says that the Rosh Chodesh thing was for women was only later. The Pirkei D'Elazar, which happens to be true that they were given Rosh Chodesh. And there's one other idea that's quoted, which is that really be'etzem the Yomim Tovim were b'schus the Avos. So you have Av Yitzchak Yaakov Pesach Shavuos Sukkos, and then that's the Yomim Tovim, and Rosh Chodesh was going to be given to the Shvatim. But once there was the Chet HaEgel, so the Chet HaEgel meant that all of the Shvatim, they were all involved. It's a Levi. They were all involved in the Chet HaEgel. Since they were involved in the Chet HaEgel, they lost it. And since who didn't partake in the Chet HaEgel, that was the women. So it was almost like they got that afterwards. Okay, either way. So Lamaisa, now that's the Gemara's bringing the Shema Mina, that the halacha is that we do tackle only 3 psukim, 3 aliyahs on Dynasty Tibur. The Gemara brings from Ravashi, the ha'anan loy tnan hachi. He says a kasha from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says Zahaklal kol yom sheyesh bo musaf in a yom tov kairin arba. And we know there's a rule. Zahaklal is always la'asuye something. La'asuye mai lav la'asuye Dynasty Tibur v'tishba. Meaning, what's left out in the Mishnah that the kol la'asuye is coming to teach me? Is it not coming to teach me the Zahaklal that it also has an extra day? Well, the Ravashi must need some money. So 1 second, Ravashi. So you're suggesting then you don't like the other brisa that you want that explicitly states that Tisha B'Av only gets 3. You want to run to our Mishnah and find a hidden message in the Kol Asuyei Mai and you're going to tell us it's talking about Dynasty Tibur. Okay, so then who is the Tana of our Mishnah? Who would be saying such a thing? Meaning, Loi Tana Kam V'Loi Rabbi Yossi. What is it talking about? The Tanya, there's a brisa. Chali Hiyos. We're talking about Tisha B'Av. Chali Hiyos b'Sheni b'Chamishi. If Tisha B'Av falls out on a Monday or a Thursday, Kairin Gimel. You read 3 aliyahs. Umafter Echad, and the third aliyah also does the Haftarah. B'Shlishi, if it falls out on Tuesday, B'Revi, or Wednesday, Kaira Echad, and it's by the way also Friday and Sunday. It just doesn't mention it. Kaira Echad Umafter Echad. It's a very interesting shita. The Tanakama holds that on those days when there's anyways no normal laning on Tisha B'Av, you only get 1 aliyah. Rabbi Yossi Omer LaOilam Kairin Gimel Umafter Echad.
By the way, it can't in the calendar. It can't fall Friday or Sunday. So I don't know.
Meaning in the current calendar.
Calendar. So I don't know if this was at that time or not. Probably
that is
not.
true, right? We pushed Tisha B'Av off from Friday and Sunday.
Lo Rosh and Tisha B'Av is the same in the Hadash as Rosh Hashanah.
All right, that's correct, right? So okay, so Lamaisa, meaning this question seems a little difficult. Meaning, we have a brisa. The brisa is explicit that you lane 3 aliyahs on Tisha B'Av. Ravashi says, okay, but I have a Mishnah. There's the Zahaklal. Zahakl's got to include something. It's got to mean Tisha B'Av. The Gemara's bothered. Who is that? Who is he like? He's like, meaning, if you're telling me that there are 2 shitas, the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi, and they both explicitly say that on Tisha B'Av you only say 3. Why didn't we just bring from this brisa to begin with? Ask the Gemara, what do we do on a Dynasty Tibur? So maybe you can't bring a riot from Tisha B'Av because maybe Tisha B'Av isn't halachically exactly a Dynasty Tibur in the way a Dynasty Tibur was in the times of the Gemara. But what we'd be saying then is that, so then what's the kasha? Maybe let Rav Ashi say, yeah, don't bring me a riot from Tisha B'Av. Maybe Tisha B'Av, you're right, you only read 3. But on a real Dynasty Tibur, right, Tisha B'Av isn't even truly a real Dynasty Tibur the way the Dynasty Tibur was in the second Dynasty. I'm saying it's a little bit difficult why the Gemara is all of a sudden bringing this brisa that it didn't bring before. It could have brought it earlier as a proof, or if it's not a proof, then it's not a kasha on Ravashi.
We may felt that the Mishnah has to be regular things, not things that are instituted one-off. So it has to be Tisha B'Av or the other Tanesi that we call Tanesi.
Could be. Okay.
In other words, yeah, because none of the other things in the Mishnah are one-offs. They're holidays.
Right, true. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So fine, okay, so Lamaisa. So we're proving that it can't be either one of those Tanaim. So it must be Rav Ashi's rule. Okay, so now we have a Zaklal. The Ela Kosh is Zaklal. Gemara says no. Takes the gears out loy and says Lasuya Rosh Chodesh Shemayit. Meaning, what do you mean Lasuya Rosh Chodesh Shemayit? Ha behed Yaktanila. Berosh Chadashim Shemayit Karan Arba. So what do you mean? The Hakol is Lasuya, the thing that's in the Mishnah? That makes no sense. So he says no. It's a Simon of Alma Yahiv. What it says, and the Hakol is coming to teach you that what I'm about to tell you, not only is it true for those halachas, but it's giving you like a little bit of a tam in understanding why it is that way. We don't want you to mistakenly conclude that Chalamayit and Yontiv, which show up at the same time, right? You have a Yontiv goes into Chalamayit, goes into Yontiv. You might think that the laning on Chalamayit is going to be the laning on Yontiv also. And maybe you'll lane 5 times on Chalamayit, or you'll lane 4 times on Rosh Chodesh, on Yontiv. Anytime there's a shtickle more kedusha from one day to the next, Tafile Gavri Yisera, you're going to have an additional aliyah. Hilkach, Rosh Chodesh Shemayit, the Ika Carbon Musaf, Karan Arba, B'Yom Tov the Aser B'Asiyas Melach Chamisha, B'Yom Kippur the Anish Kares Shisha, and Shabbos the Ika Isiskila Shiva. We'll see tomorrow's daf. We'll discuss the Shita Rabbi Akiva, who has
that flips it.
He flips it.
We're saying like a little bit behind the scenes that there are exceptions to this Zaklal Lasuya Mari. There could be another reason why it says
right. Zaklal doesn't necessarily have to mean an actual halacha that's mentioned in the Mishnah. It could just be. It's almost like it's like a secret code.
It's an idea.
Yeah.
It has to include a new idea. I thought it was funny. The Mishnah that we had the other day, it gave this exceedingly long list of things we do during the day. You never saw such a long list. I don't know. Did it have 15 items from Karbonos and stuff? And then they wanted one more because of the Zaklal. And they found, because the list was already so long, they had to go to the Bazichim, which is not even like something that anyone does, right? I mean, they had to go so
as if they couldn't find something else that's kosher kol hayoim.
Right, because the list was
tzitzis.
Right, well, that's true. Yeah.
Maybe it was talking about things you could be yotzei.
Yeah, why didn't they include those? Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's kasha in general. There's both those mishnayos as to why they didn't include it. But okay.
Yeah.
Gufa. Rab Ikla Above. Let's go back to the same meister from Amud Aleph. Rab Ikla Above the Tainus Tiber, Kam Kara B'Safra, and he lanes. Pasach Brich, and he opened up with bracha Asher B'Chabanu Chasam V'Lei Baruch, but he didn't end off with Ashnas Lana Teres Emes. Nafal Kule Alma Anpei. Everyone did Tachna Rav Le Nafal Al Anpei. My time Rav Le Nafal Al Anpei. Why did Rav not fall on his face? Meaning, why did he not do Tachna along the rest of them? So the Gemara says, Ritz B'Shel Avanim Isa, because where Rav was davening was on a Ritz B'Shel Avanim, and since the floor was made of Avanim, there's an issue of a problem of, we'll see, V'Tanya, Evan Maschis Lo Sitnu Be'artzchem Lishtachavois Aleh, which is an Isser to be Mishtachave on the ground. Now we'll have to understand exactly, as a Machlokes Rishonim, what exactly this Isser is. Is it that it's like near a Kavod Zara? Is it like a cover to the Beis Hamikdash that we don't do it without a Beis Hamikdash? There's different shittas in the Rishonim, but the bottom line is we don't prostrate ourselves on the ground. And the understanding over here is that Aleha
on a stone ground.
On a stone ground. Aleha iyata mishtachave be'artzachem dafke in the Beis Hamikdash, right? Oh, sorry, outside the Beis Hamikdash. Avalata mishtachave alavonim shel Beis Hamikdash. Meaning the only way we do this prostrating is inside the Beis Hamikdash when you're going to be on stone. But let's say over here we have like a nice stone tile over here. You don't go down and put your face to the ground on and spread your arms and legs. In which case, then that's why Rav didn't do it. For the Gemara, if there was an isser for doing nefilas apayim because you're going to be bowing down onto the ground, then why did everyone else do it? As the Gemara, kulu nami. So the Gemara gives a couple of answers. Kama de Rav have, the stone was in front of Rav, and it was not in front of the other people. So when Rav went ahead to do tachnan, he couldn't do it, so he did a regular tachnan without bowing down. So then why not walk over to the area where there's no stone? Maybe there's a little carpet, do it over there. He says, no, different mahalchim here in the Rishonim, either that he didn't want to make everyone have to get up again as he's walking by, or maybe the time it would take him to go there, whatever, they were waiting. Right. Whatever the mahalach is, he didn't want to be matriach the tzibur. But la'olam, what we're assuming right now in this point of the Gemara is the isser is to bow down onto a stone floor. Gemara says, Rav pishu yadayim raglayim haviyav, meaning it wasn't just a regular ishtachavoya. Ishtachavoya is when you put your knees down and you bow, maybe you put your face down. But he says not only putting your head down onto the floor, but also splaying yourself, so to speak, with your legs and your arms spread out. That was the mahalach that Rav used to do, and therefore that this halacha of bowing on a stone floor It's only a problem if you're also doing pishu yadayim v'raglayim, meaning if you're spreading out your knees and your arms and your legs, and you're putting your face to the ground, that already is a problem. But if you're missing one or the other, then it could be it's not a problem. And therefore, what the Gemara means to say is that Rav, since that's the way he did it, he wouldn't go down, even though it was stone in front of him. Everyone else had stone in front of them, but there was no problem because when they were doing tachnon, they weren't doing pishu yadayim v'raglayim. I asked the Gemara, who says he's got to do such a frum version of hishtachavoya? Maybe just go down a little bit. Some people bend over all the way. You don't have to be so frum. And therefore, you're not going to be over in that area. Do like everyone else. The Gemara says, he had the minute to do it this way, and he didn't want to switch. In which case, according to the second teretz, the isser it's more of a kula. What we're saying is that in order to be over in the isser, you need not only to be touching your face to the ground, but also that you have to spread your arms and legs out. The same a third teretz, adam chashav shani, meaning that la'oila kidder Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar ain't adam chashav v'shoy lipol al panav, ala imkein ne'enek Yeshua ben Nun. We saw this in Tainus. And the point is that Rav was different. He was an Adam Chashav, and therefore he in general wouldn't do Nefilas Apayim, because Nefilas Apayim is only something one does if he's absolutely guaranteed that he's going to be Nene, like it says that Hashem was Mechiach Yehoshua for doing it. He says, get up, and different Mahalchim and how to understand Pshat in that pasuk, whether Hashem was being Mechiachim or if Hashem was saying only Yeshua's Nene. The Gemara means to say, who says there'll be a Nene like Yeshua? Whichever way you go through in the Rishonim over here, the point of the Gemara is there's no raya that Rav didn't actually be Neifel al Panim, in which case you have no raya to exactly how we're going to interpret the halacha of Evan Maschis. Halach lamaisa, I believe, min ha-Torah, one cannot put his face onto the ground. Therefore, that's why we take a towel on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur when we go down. You don't really need anything for your legs. People make themselves crazy to put something by their knees, by their feet, but the thing is just amaratzis. Really, you just need to put something down so that when you put your face to the floor, it's not touching the stone. I mean, that's pretty much.
It says this specifically that you should put the cloth at your face, not at your knees.
Oh, I'm not sure if it says that specifically, but that's the isser is being noifel panim onto the thing. Now with the Rabbanan, we say it's going to be us, meaning the isser deraisa is with both face on the ground and pishu yadayim v'raglayim. But the Rabbanan, if you're missing either one of those things, it's a problem on an Evan that's floor. So if you're not touching your face, if you're just pushing your hands down, then maybe that's where that minute comes from to take it out of that. But even there, you're not being push yadayim v'raglayim when you put your knees down on the floor and you're going down. If anything, your hands and your legs are sort of together with you.
Well, we do our best. There's no room in the shul. Maybe the Beis Hamikdash spread out, but our shuls, people do their best to spread out. Right. I don't think they could literally lie down.
No.
Yeah.
Either way, continues the Gemara. We'll just learn to the bottom over here, to the two dots over here. Tana Rabbanan. Kida. The Gemara talks about kida in many places. A certain type of avoda, a certain type of ishtachavoya. What does it mean? It's alapayim. That's referring to when you literally prostrate yourselves down to the floor. And we'll see in a moment. It's a pretty flexibility.
Acrobatic.
It's an acrobatic move. Yeah, exactly. Shenemar the Sikha Basheva. I'm not sure if I have the Nakudas here, right? Apayim Aretz? Apayim Aretz? Yeah. Kriya, when it says Kereya, that's Al Birkayim, that's on your knees. V'chein hu oimer mechraya al Birkov, Ishtachavoya zu pishu yadayim v'raglayim. Shenemar Havaynova yani v'imcha v'achecha l'ishtachavoya s'lecha arza. You see in all these different cases,
so it's not 100% clear what the difference is between kida and ishtachava, just from this.
Yeah, from this language, all you see that it's on the ground. Maybe
both.
Yeah, right. One is on the ground, the other one is referring to you're putting your face. I mean, that's the only distinction here. Now, Levi achri kida. This also is in, I think, Tainus. Is it Tainus or Rosh Hashanah?
No, it was
Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, it was.
No, Tainus. Yeah. Levi achri kida. He did this kida. Kame de Rebbe.
Yeah, it was Tainus.
Ve'itla, and he got very hurt. He became lame. Put him in a wheelchair. V'haka garmela, you telling me the reason why he got hurt is because he did kida, because he's trying to do a yoga pose. A person should be careful not to, speak disrespectfully or throw things up. It should be disrespectful. Why? It happened once that some did such a thing, and he got hurt. Umanu, who is it? Levi. So you see, Levi was itla not because of kida, but because he did something wrong. Gemara says, what do you mean? What do you mean? The fact that he did what he did made it possible that he could be susceptible, vulnerable to injury. And then when he did that thing that has a danger to it, this came up in the Gemara over there about Shmuel and Rav walking by the walls, all these types of different things. Meaning, so the Gemara just ends off with the story of Rav. We said wouldn't do tachan because maybe he was an Adam Chashav. So therefore, he wouldn't go. So Rava and Abai were also Adam Chashuv. They wouldn't do it either. But what they would do is they would sort of turn to their side a little bit. I do think this is where we get the minig of, we lean a little on our arm. It's not a full shtachavoya, but it's a little bit of something. Not that we're all b'nei Adam Chashuvim, but.
So matli means to tilt.
Okay, we'll hold here.
Matli means